Okay, so now we can finally start with the grade, and we're going to start as we always do with our look development phase. Now, this is an interesting one. This is a horror comedy feature film which revolves around scarecrows which come to life and start attacking people, hence the name, Scary Crows. This is actually the final scene in the film, and as such, things are quite dramatic and things are quite intense, and it's got to play quite on the kind of horror vibes going on. It's got to look quite dark and threatening, but there's got to be a playful, cartoonish edge carrying through it. It is still at its heart a comedy, with horror elements more than kind of a 50-50 horror comedy split. So I've got a few shots marked green here. I've got the shot you see right now. There's this shot, which is a good one, and then there's this shot, which shows us some more action taking place as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to do look development on these three shots, 2 or 3 looks on each, and then we're going to decide on our direction. Now, the brief I had for this project, and it was ages ago now, was that it's meant to look like a live-action cartoon. It's meant to look like a live-action version of Scooby-Doo. So we thought we'd take a reference from that. Now, there are things that I could take from this photo. Scooby-Doo itself didn't have a great look. It wasn't an amazing film, when all is said and done. So we've got this kind of reference here, but more relevant to me is Pushing Daisies, which was a series I absolutely loved. But yeah, this is a horribly pixelated reference because the only Pushing Daisies stuff I could find on YouTube to take a screenshot from is like in 240p and just looks like this when you take a still. But even with this horribly mangled image, you can see a clear distinction between the kind of bluish teal background, the strong warm colours, the cartoony red, the cartoony yellow. The yellow here correlates very nicely to the yellow on the shirt here, on the guy on the right, and we've got the reds and the spatters of blood, which are here as well. So we can probably build a fairly decent analogue to this look in this sequence, and it will fit the whole thing quite well. Other references we've got are the 2013 version of Evil Dead. Now, this is more of a straight up horror kind of a look, and whilst we can take aspects of this, we're not going to rebuild this look exactly. We're not after a film that looks exactly like this because the overall atmosphere is different. It's horror comedy, it's kind of a dark comedy, so we're not going to play this look completely straight, although there are certainly aspects of it we can take, like the kind of yellowish green undertones and shadows here, and the very pearly looking skin, and that blue jacket has been quite well kind of preserved as well. So we can take a look at that. And the last reference I have is more of that kind of yellowish dark green look. And this is a still taken from an old film called Funny Man, which I don't expect anyone out there to be aware of. It's a bit like the Leprechaun films. It is complete garbage. In fact, it's so bad it succeeds in being entertaining in places. If you have an interest in films which are so bad they're a weird kind of good, then Funny Man is one you might check. Just, 18 certificate, it's gross, it's violent, it's deliberately crass. If you like those kinds of films, it might be worth hunting that one down, although it's quite hard to find now. So I'm going to get started on this wide shot here, and I think the first thing I'm going to try is probably kind of a blue warm split. I think I'm probably looking more at the Pushing Daisies morgue kind of a look here, so I'll start with that one. So let's get started. I'll start with my basic primaries. Now we've got quite a yellow colour balance here. So I'm just Just need to be careful. I need to keep an eye on the skin tones. Maybe I can warm up the mids a little bit, maybe make them a bit more yellow. Whilst keeping the background kind of fairly neutral, I want to be careful of pink skin here. I want to be careful of a general kind of pink wash that we may be getting. So what I will do is I will bring our mids down a little bit with the curve there. It's getting a little bit, I don't want the hair to go weird, so I just want to be careful. There we go. So that's a fairly good basic primary. That's kind of a good starting point, and we're now going to start building upon this. Now, one of the key things about this is a feature film project, and this is fundamentally different from the previous projects we've been working on. Previous projects have been relatively low volume and very high quality work that we're doing. We spend a lot of time to turn around 2 minutes of footage, a full working day on 2 minutes of footage. And I'll get booked for that on like corporates and music videos. Feature films are different. Feature films are quite high volume and then I'd say adequate to high quality. What we end up doing is we end up working within the time frame we have. And because of that, in this particular project, this isn't going to take as long. We're not going to spend as long doing it because what I want us to do now is have our first experience of having to work to pace. I might spend an 8-hour working day grading a 2-minute ad, but in a feature film I could have 75 to 90 minutes of footage and 10 days in which to do it. So if I have a 90-minute film and we've got 4.5 minutes of footage in this exercise, if I spend a tenth of my working time on 1/20th of the project, then the numbers just don't work. With that in mind, this isn't going to be as slow, this isn't going to be as detailed as the other grades, because outside of this 4-minute chunk, I've got another, 86 minutes to take care of. So in this case, I'm going to be focusing on working in quite an efficient manner. I'm going to be focusing on working in quite a different manner from previous projects. I'm not going to do as much super detailed stuff like tracking out eyes or smaller points of interest. So let's keep going. So on this grade we've made our first primary and we're going to continue going. So the first thing I'm going to do is start building up the kind of cool background, and I might just start that by cooling down the highlights a little bit and pushing warmth back into the mids. We can counter these two adjustments against each other and we can start to cool our background down. Now I'm getting some pinkish hues in the skin which I want to avoid, so I'm going to go into hue versus hue, and I'm going to get the magenta, and I'm going to make sure that the magenta parts of the red all fall. See, I can make the lips very pink, very purple, or I can bring it back down, make it a bit more orange. So what I'd want to do is make sure that those magenta bits there are definitely in the right area. And now I can probably start looking at a secondary key here. Let's just put that node in the right place. Now there are a few ways I can approach this. I'm going to start by building a layer stack, I think. And I know I'm going to want to place the shirt and the skin on top of a blue background. So what I will do is I'll first make my blue background. And it's quite saturated, quite blue. So I'm going to put a fair amount. And we'll just turn off these other two layers so we can actually see the blue background. I'm going to put a fair amount . We don't want it to go green in this one, we're going to make it blue. So there we go, that's getting to a decent match. Also, the kind of greenish tint is, we've got quite a warm environment anyway, and blue plus yellow is green. But that kind of greenish tint helps sell the fact that it's a horror. We associate green more with, horror more than blue or cyan. So that's looking like a good background, and it's not a terrible look by itself. We can just start to refine it. So what we'll do, we're going to do the easy thing first. We're going to key out, get the right window active, then we're going to key out that shirt. Make sure we don't pick up, excuse me, make sure we don't pick up any of the low saturation noise, and then we'll just clean it out, and we'll give it a good old blur. And now we've got that blue background, but of course we've now got a layer with just the yellow shirt on top. We're not looking for overlap, we're not looking for that kind of natural blend in this one. We want some quite good colour separation, and to that end we've now got the yellow shirt, and because I've got it there I can now make it as strong as I like, or I can make it a different colour, whatever. It's looking pretty good as it is. It might be a little bit on the red side. I might just drag it a little bit more towards like a primary yellow. And just tone it down a little bit, and then I've got that nice strong colour against the cold background, which is quite reminiscent of this look from Pushing Daisies. So my next step is going to be the harder key. It's going to be to key out the skin. So let's see how far we get with this. Now this is 10 or 12-bit red. We should be pretty good. We don't need to worry about it overlapping with the shirt. That's fine. We kind of don't want these bits of the shirt coming out. And we definitely want to avoid this bit of the background here, so we just need to clean white, and definitely clean black, and then blur it out a good bit. What we don't want to get are odd bits of the hair. So we don't want the hair to go green when we're building colour separation. Well, this isn't a colour separation look, this is a colour contrast look, my mistake. When we're building a colour contrast look like this, which is actually not too far removed from a fairly traditional teal and orange, what we want to avoid doing is having parts of the hair go blue or green, because that's a dead giveaway, and it's actually very hard to avoid. We need to watch out for this little bar down here. So what we're going to do... Now with the very dark bits, I'm not going to worry about that too much, but if, you know, these lighter brown parts of the hair were to start going green, we'd have a problem. The shadows, not too much. Also, his blue eyes are being made much more obvious by the colour contrast. That's quite common. We just need to make sure that they don't start looking like really odd and distracting. But I think they're okay where they are. We just need to keep an eye out for this. If we watch this through now, we've got chattering noise down here. The little bits of his shirt aren't actually very visible, and we can approach those just by dialing up the clean black and then blurring it out a little bit more clean white. And these little bits in the shirt here, they're not perceptible. If we look, we have to watch it through. We'll take a look at a full res version. That looks pretty good. That looks fine. We've got a little bit of a red shadow down here. That's actually quite stable, but I still want to get rid of it. I don't want that little red shadow to persist. So what I can do, he's got a very evil looking stare right there. What I can do, because we know that the yellow shirt overlaps beneath, I can do quite a crude... That's my phone. Can do quite a crude matte out there, and it's not going to cut into our shirt, because don't forget that the shirt is already qualified here, and now we've gotten rid of that bit down there. So that's a good start. Now we just need to work on the skin and make sure that it gels with the rest of the image. I actually think it does look alright at the moment. I might bring the saturation down a little bit. Let's just experiment, see if adding magenta helps us. I don't think it does. The guy on the right is very yellow, tan looking, and the guy on the left is a bit pinker. And just take the skin tones down. So the skin tones are quite wan and quite kind of pale looking. We've got that nice yellow shirt. I'm going to jack up the yellow shirt now. And I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm just going to change the order of the layers here, because I know I've made a mistake. If we put the shirt on top, then that's fine. But if I have the shirt underneath this key, then all of this bit here is going to interfere with the grade of the shirt underneath. So something that slipped my mind at the time. It is, however, very easy to fix. We just make sure that the shirt is on top of everything else. And now we've got that nice, strong, yellow, cartoonish look there. That's a little bit strong. I'd say that's probably good, and I like that. So the difference that makes, I like that strong yellow colour there. Now, I'm done with my layer stack. It's done what I need it to do. I've got my blue background, I've got my skin tones, and I've got my yellow shirt. I'm happy. So now, I'm going to move on. I'm just going to finish this off. Now, I'm not going to make super detailed adjustments here, and I'm also not going to do any tracking or vignetting in this node. Later on, what we're going to do is we're going to group all of these shots together and then apply this to all of them. So, I'm just going to add the final few tweaks, and this isn't as in, this clearly isn't as in depth as tripping over my own tongue, give me a second. This clearly is not as in depth as other grades we've done on other practical projects, but like I say, hypothetically we've got much more material to deal with this time. So I'm just going to see how far I can push the kind of dark look. Okay, and I think that's alright. The hair is looking a little bit weird, and that's because our shadows, the hair is in the shadow part of the tonal range, but it's also very saturated, so if we pull it down, it's going to look a bit weird. So what we can do to counteract that is just bring our shadow saturation down. But we don't want to have weird charcoal streaks running through it. We want it to look natural, so we can probably do that. There. And I might just lay off of the curve a smidge there. And then we've got quite a nice dark look, quite a nice moody look. We can just experiment a bit. We can see if bringing it down and stretching out the contrast helps it. I don't believe that it does. I think that's pretty good. Let's just take a look, see if we can... Yeah. Again, the hair looks odd if I crush the shadows down too far, and I don't want that kind of black charcoal effect. So I think that's pretty good. I would say that's a finished look for this sequence. That's a finished look for this shot. And we're going to then take this still and put it in our LD stills. This is relatively simple. Again, fine. Lots of material to work on this time. We don't have the time to go in and start rotoscoping eyes out or doing any of that. So we've now got our first LD still. We're then going to make a new local version. We'll call it version 2. We're not being too fussy this time. And then we will start again. In fact, to tell you what I'll do is I will get rid of everything save the first primary node, because that's a pretty good starting point. In fact, the first 2 primary nodes, because they're 2 pretty good starting points. So, same basic primary grade, this time different look. This time we're going to go for a more conventional horror look. We're going to go for something a bit closer to, well, inspired by the Evil Dead reboot, which was surprisingly good, actually. And we're going to give it another go. So this time we're going to want it to be green and dark and punchy and gritty, and what we're going to do is we're going to set up a bleach bypass using a layer stack again. So we're going to set up a pretty traditional bleach. We're going to make our top layer, bottom node, remember, black and white. And just like in the layer node tutorial, we're going to overlay it, and we can see we're beginning to get far. I still don't like how that hair comes out. The hair bugs me in this shot. Now, that's a good start. There's obviously a lot more going on. This is very stylized and very extreme. It kind of fits the expression of the actor here, but later on this guy becomes incapacitated by hay fever after fighting off a scarecrow. Some hay spills out and he has a sneezing fit, so it's not all gritty and dark all the way through. We need to retain that kind of comedic feel. So, good start, but there's more to be done. I'm going to make another serial node after the node that makes everything black and white on our top layer. And into this, I'm going to start introducing some green into the shadows. Now, if I start looking at this node alone, you can see I've made a kind of a green and white effect, a kind of a monotone black and white effect. But the shadows are green, not black, so we now have a kind of grayscale green, a monochromatic green effect. Now, if I use this as my overlay, as my kind of layer of silver crystals in my bleach bypass, it automatically gives us a kind of green tint. So it shortcuts out that green shadows look that we start getting. Now, this look doesn't actually look like a bleach bypass, but I like the green-yellow shadows, and I think if I feed that into a bleach, things are going to get quite interesting. So what I will then do is start feeding some yellow into the mids, and I'm going to make the highlights a little bit cooler. And we're just going to keep going. And it's deliberately too strong right now, because we're going to tone it down. So then we have a weird yellow-green looking overlay. And we're starting to get that kind of sickly green-yellow feel, which is good. But obviously the contrast is totally out of whack, so we're going to have to pare this back a little bit. So I'm going to go into key output, and I'm going to take it right down, and I'm just going to bring it up to about 6.5, 0.65. And I think that's now looking good. And then what I'm going to do in this node, I'm just going to bring my shadows up a little bit, and I'm going to bring my mids down. And what I'm trying to avoid here is that weird flattening of the hair over here. And then maybe I'm actually going to bring my... Now the highlights can stay where they are, otherwise we get the kind of stereotype silvery highlights you get in a bleach and they don't always look good. I'm going to bring that up a little bit. And then I'm going to do just a little bit of work underneath. And don't want it to be too bright. This bright region on the right hand side is a bit distracting. But that's fine. So now after the layer mixer node, what I can do is I can do a bit of digital relighting. I can just draw a big soft shape over here, feather it out a load, and then I'm just going to bring my highlights down over here, and now you can immediately see how that's distracting in the right hand side, and now that's much better. It's got a softer edge. We can't see that we've drawn a shape there. That's just a bit of basic digital relighting for us. And this then I might just play around with the saturation of the bottom layer. Okay, I don't like the skin there, but I like the yellow shirt. So let me just think about that for a second. If you can hear someone with a circular saw going at it, then my next door neighbour chops wood, and I can't control when he's using the chainsaw or the circular saw, whatever. That can get quite frustrating when you're spending a full day recording for an online course that you run. Okay, what I might just do is just take a look here. Let's see if I might be able to bring the colour of the shirt back. On paper that seemed like a good idea, in practice it just doesn't work, so we'll forget that idea. That's fine, not everything works out. And now all I really want to do is make sure I've got grounded shadows. Last little tweak of the contrast. And there we have a fairly decent bleach bypass kind of thriller horror look. This leans much more into it being an actual horror as opposed to a comedy. There may be elements that we can take from this. It might not be the best fit overall for the sequence, but we'll see. Out of the two so far, I come down more on the kind of color contrast as opposed to the bleach bypass, but we'll take a look. It might be a little bit on the sepia side. I might just bring the yellowness down and jack up the green a little bit to kind of sell the whole kind of green shadows look. There we go. And that's now our second developed look for this. Looking at how this is working out, I think it's going to be a pretty good blueprint for the rest of the sequence. We probably won't go through the other two shots. We'll just use this as our reference throughout. I don't think the other two shots are going to be necessary at this rate. So what we'll do is we'll reset. Actually, no, we won't. We will make a new local version. Then we're going to reset. Actually, no, tell you what, I will delete everything save for the first two nodes. And then we've got our third look. Let's take a look at our references. So we've got two main looks in here. I suppose the next thing to try would be a green shadows tint without the bleach bypass. So let's do that. Let's go for something a bit more funny, man. You will never ever hear a serious filmmaker say that again. Let's try and make our project like Funny Man. Okay. So this time we're looking to make some kind of greener undertones and make it generally more colourful, possibly a bit warmer. We can take a look at this again. The skin is very glowy and warm. We don't want that exact effect on here because it's not justified. There are no justifiable lighting effects. This is from a kind of alternate dimension kind of dream state scene where this woman's a medium and is kind of doing something in a different world. So there's kind of an otherworldly look, but we can take the kind of saturated yellow-green warm look idea from this. So what we will do, we'll start to set up a parallel stack this time. And the first node is going to put some green into our shadows. Now we're going to use the HSL key, and we're just going to use the luminance channel alone. And we're going to just start selecting the shadows. Now we need to be careful with this look because it hits the hair. We just need to watch out for this. Oops, wrong one. High. Now one of the things we can do to avoid hitting skin and bits of hair is we can bring the high sat down as well. And what that does is it allows us to miss out things which are very highly saturated. And that's typically kind of skin shadows, things like that. And what we'll do is we'll just soften that down. And you can see now how that stops us from hitting the hair. But we don't want to start losing this background. So then what we'll do, we'll clean black, clean white, and then we'll give it a good strong blur. We don't want to be too aggressive here because we don't want the hair to glow green, but we can get a start here. So we've now got the background. What we'll do is we'll pull green into our mids. If we're too aggressive, it starts to look really wrong. We're going to pull some green into our mids. I might just let a little bit more of this. And we don't want it kind of bluey teal. We want a more yellowish, sickly looking green. And we'll bring the saturation down a little bit. And we'll push a bit into the shadows. Now our shadows are looking a little bit off, but we're going to fix that in a second. So that's an okay-ish looking green shadow effect there, maybe a little bit closer towards yellow. What I will then do, I'm going to go into the log controls. I'm going to go into shadow. I'm going to set my low range down to like 120. And now I'm going to put magenta into my shadows. And I'm just going to balance that until what happens is I'm going to get rid of the green in the very darkest parts of the image, which should be neutral black. So I'm going to preserve my core blacks. I'm going to keep my shadows the way they should be. Okay, so if we take a look at that now, we've got quite a strong green push in the background. What I'm then going to do is I'm going to build a key around the skin in the next parallel node. Very easy to do. We're just going to clean black and we're going to give it a good strong blur as well. And now we've got our green background. We're probably going to tone that down later on. It does look a little bit odd. And we can just warm up our skin tones. Make them nice and warm looking. So we're taking this kind of green-orange idea, but we're not recreating it completely. Tell you what we might also do. We might just bring the... because we can just play with that until we're happy. This is now just giving us stronger skin tones. Tell you what I will do after that parallel stack is what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of the saturation out of the shadows again, just take care of the kind of weird hair. Cool. Okay, the green's still looking a little bit odd, so what we'll do is we'll just play around with this node until we're happy. And we're beginning to get this kind of a look, so what we can then do is we can play around with our exposure. So we'll make a new node, we'll get the curve down, and we can play around with doing that. That's not really working. What we can then do then is just bring down some of our shadows. Tell you what, I'm going to delete that shadow desaturation node. I'm going to put it all on the same node. So we can pull things down, get a bit more moody, and then after that, obviously the hair is going very odd. What we will then do is we'll bring that saturation in the hair down. Again, trying to avoid it getting kind of charcoal looking black streaks. So we're just going to keep massaging this until we're okay, and like I said, we're not going to draw masks around anything, we're not going to do huge amounts of roto or anything like that. We want to make sure this is something we can apply. So this looks reasonably strong to me. I might just tweak my highlights up a little bit. Actually, you know what? No, I'm going to leave the highlights where they are because his skin starts to go quite odd otherwise. So this is now a darker, greener look. It's not the same as the bleach bypass. You can see the difference the bleach makes. That's a little bit full on. Maybe if we were going for the bleach, we'd make it a little bit less strong. Maybe a 50-50 between these two. But this is look development. Things don't have to be finished. They just need to give a good indication of the direction in which we're going. So I'd say I'd call that look development done there. That's our third look. So we've got our 3 looks to choose from. We've got this look. We've got our first color contrast. I've got to say this is my favorite at the moment. We'll probably continue with this style. And then we've got our bleach, which there are elements of that which work, but it needs a lot of work to continue. And then we've got the green look, which is probably not quite selling things as strong as it needs to be. This is quite a cartoony, quite a hyper-real project. We don't want things to look natural or standard. We want things to be convincing, but things have to convey a sense of what we call hyper-reality, something being very intense, emotions being very intense, kind of eccentricities of the world, eccentricities of storytelling, character quirks being very almost cartoonishly intense. So we want to kind of sell that with good strong colours, and I think what accomplishes that is the blue-yellow contrast here. Right, so this is look development. This time, like I said, it's not been as in-depth as the last two. That's because we have a lot more material to work with, and we're going to keep it, we're going to focus on working at pace here. So as we go forwards, now that we've done our look development phase, I want us to keep the following statement in mind, yeah? I have 4 hours to finish this. In the last 2 projects, we had a small amount of footage and we were booked out on corporate or a music video. We had the time. This is a feature film. We have 10 days to do this and there are 90 minutes to get through. This is just 4.5 minutes, yeah? So I have 4 hours to do this. We want to try and see if we can work at a reasonable pace. Do not worry if on the first attempt things go way over and it takes 6 or even 8, whatever, that's fine. If you want to take your time on this and do a really detailed grade, again, that's absolutely fine. What I strongly recommend is that at some point you sit down in front of this and you say, right, I'm going to pretend I have the rest of a feature film to get through. I've got 4 hours to finish this sequence. That's first, second, and third pass, right? And then what we're doing then is we're training ourselves to work towards a deadline, to work, you know, at what we call reasonable pace. So keep that in mind as we go on to the first pass. And when you're ready, click on through to the next lecture.